Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started today. I'd like to welcome everybody to the DirectWorks webinar, Sourcing 2.0, Lessons Learned in Transforming Direct Materials Sourcing and Supplier Management, delivered in cooperation with Nexteer Automotive. My name is Wes Willoughby. I'm the Vice President of Customer Success at DirectWorks. Our speaker today is Eric Chavez, Global Systems Manager in the Global Supply Management Group at Nexteer. And providing the wrap-up for the webinar will be Lisa Kustra, Senior Vice President of Sales at DirectWorks. A quick note that we're going to be accepting questions for Eric from the audience. You can submit them through the chat panel found at the top of the screen. You'll submit them to our organizer, Carrie Klepsig. We'll spend some time at the end going through as many questions as we can, so we encourage you to submit them throughout the presentation, and we'll do our best to get to them as time permits. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started. The DirectWorks Customer Success team has the pleasure of working with new customers during the implementation process and subsequent rollout of the DirectWorks platform. And understandably, customers want to know how their predecessors have been successful. They don't want to reinvent the wheel. They're looking to leverage best practices, avoid mistakes made in the past, and ultimately give themselves best chances for success. So I'm happy that Eric Chavez from Nexteer is here to share their story. They've been a great partner for DirectWorks and have proven very successful at implementing a solution that's universally adopted and providing significant value as a result. And I think there's a lot to learn from the approach that Nexteer took through the whole process, from surveying the team for requirements and getting internal buy-in to pursue new technology, to how they involve key parties in the definition and implementation process to ensure the configured solution matched their needs at the end result. And perhaps most importantly, and I think often overlooked, is their understanding and appreciation for the internal change management that's necessary to maximize the success of a new solution. So Eric's going to walk us through their journey. As I said, we'll take some Q&A at the end as time permits. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Eric Chavez, Global Systems Manager for Global Supply Management at Nexteer. He's going to walk us through their journey, which ultimately led to their selecting and implementing DirectWorks as their technology partner. Eric?
All right, thank you, Wes, and good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone, depending on where you are in the world. Today, as Wes said, I'm here to talk about our ERFQ transformation project, which ultimately is part of our ongoing journey to achieve sourcing excellence. But before I get into that, I'll just go through a quick introduction about Nexteer and the organization I support. Currently, Nexteer is headquartered in Saginaw, Michigan, but as you can see on the map on the right, we have customer service and manufacturing locations around the world. Annual revenue in 2014 was $3 billion and a global workforce of approximately 12,000. Our main products are EPS, electronic power steering, HPS, hydraulic power steering, steering columns, and driveline and half shafts. Real quickly, a little quick overview of our purchasing organization that I work for. We're made up of approximately 300 team members around the world, led by our commercial department, quality, value enhancement, and myself in business process management and systems. We manage approximately 1,600 direct material suppliers if you count all manufacturing locations. And really from an SRM standpoint, each location is a different relationship to maintain, so we do count them all. If you look at it purely from a parent perspective, the number could probably be cut in half. So, after that, brief overview of us, before I jump into the transformation story, there's one more slide that I wanted to share, and this is our organization's vision and mission. And I share this because this is what I consider to be my true north. As you can see, the vision and mission are very broad, and each functional leader must decide what that means for them. For my team, it means that we streamline processes, empower our employees, increase transparency, and gain user adoption. Establishing this true north, to me, is the first step and one of the most important steps before you undergo any transformation initiative. For me, the thing that I always have to remember or to keep in mind is that not everyone is excited about change as I am, so establishing that why up front has a major impact later on. Okay, so now I gave you a little bit of background. Let's talk a little bit more about the actual initiative. First, we'll talk a little bit about identifying the need for a change. For me, the need was simple and obvious. At that time, our existing RFQ tool, while still new, lacked the ability to align to our internal processes and future needs. Band-aids or workarounds were designed into the process in order to make the tool work. Furthermore, we outgrew the product and needed something that considered a detailed cost breakdown, supplier cost models, component BOM structures, component program structures. We really wanted to be able to look and see where components are being sourced, for which application, and by when. Because of our commitment to business process management and continuous improvement, we also needed a solution that was scalable and fit our vision and mission, which if I go back to for a quick moment, it's to meet or exceed expectations in quality, cost, delivery, and launch readiness. I know I didn't read that on that slide. I didn't want to spend a lot of time on there, but in many cases, that's really what, the RFQ is setting the tone for the rest of that entire process. So, these are my key factors of where I felt the product was at that time for what we were using. But what about the users? What were they feeling? In this case, most of them were unhappy with the existing system, but at that time were resistant to change. Many preferred the manual RFQ process, which was validated by the lack of user adoption, which was partly due to the little incentive to actually use the tool. At the time, we struggled to get internal and supplier users to actually use the system. And for the most part, and probably the most important part, it was many did not understand how an eRFQ tool could help us achieve sourcing excellence. It was simply viewed as a task that they were supposed to complete rather than something they wanted to do. So, with that, I kind of know, now I know from a leadership level we need to make a change. I even know from a user level they feel that a change is necessary but really don't want to go through it at this point. This is where now you really need to spend some time on gaining internal buy-in, and this is where we spend a lot of our time. So, our path is set, but alignment was really only at that leadership level. So now I'm really going after that buy-in. Personally, I look for buy-in to achieve two things. First, at the executive level, I'm looking to establish a budget. Obviously, we all know without that, there can be no project that requires spending. Next, I want to make sure we have top-down alignment and commitment. And finally, I look for accountability. Who will be accountable for this project, the success or the failure, and how will it be measured? In my organization, these types of projects, typically it's me, but regardless, if you have someone dedicated or not, someone must be accountable. It shows, first, that there's commitment to the change, and second, that it's a key component to your overall strategy. Lastly, I look for buy-in to set the tone for user adoption. At this point, all I'm looking to achieve is alignment that the change is necessary at the user level. So let's talk a little bit about gaining buy-in at the executive leadership level. It's different in every organization and company culture. For me, in our culture, I'm lucky and it's easy, and that's simply because I was brought in to do these types of projects. For others, it may not be so easy. Some things that you can do to help get executive buy-in is first, make the project personal. Align the project directly to goals and objectives set up by the leader and or the organization. Make it a must and not a nice to have. Second, establish a realistic budget. It's easy to scare away, an executive early on by asking for too much, and if you ask for too little, it may be impossible to get the additional budget required. At this point, high-level benchmarking can usually get you in the ballpark. You can easily do some searching, find some products and look at their price schedules if they publish them online, or even without getting too far into detail, inquire what those costs may be. Next, user buy-in. And really, this is the most important piece. This will set the tone for user adoption. Personally, I feel if you skip this step, your buy-in, the low buy-in may result in low user adoption. If you remember my slide on the vision and mission, my objectives are clear. I want the organization to be empowered. Part of that also means that I get early feedback on our current process. For that, I'm looking for what's working, what's not working, identifying the waste in the process, establishing the must-haves, the nice-haves from the users. What are they looking to really get out of it? Here, all I'm trying to see is how our current process either helps us achieve our goals or prohibits us from achieving our goals. The important thing to note here is that at this point, I'm not talking to our user base about change. I'm simply looking at our current process and seeing how it aligns to our goals and objectives. Next part is just communicating the change. So, once you've taken the time to understand the processes, understand the pain points, now you can start talking about the change. By this time, you have the means to validate that the change is necessary, and you can start to discuss how this will benefit everyone. And really involve them in it. Make everyone part of the process, not just in the feedback, but make them aware that, one, you're going to involve them in the selection process. Two, you're going to involve them going forward, and that they'll weigh in on the requirements. And finally, and I kind of said it already, but communicate, communicate, communicate. I cannot stress this enough. The last thing you want to do is find out that there are people in the organization who are unaware of a change once you've decided to go down that path. Quick, interesting story for why buy-in is so key. If you can remember a few slides ago, I mentioned that our previous RFQ tool was new and the users were unhappy with it. The fact is that it was actually only in place for a little over a year and enforced for much less of that. Our users, while unhappy, were still resistant to change. During a workshop, we were sitting around discussing, the issues with the current tool, what we needed to do going forward to change it so we can start better utilizing it and things like that. And I mentioned prematurely that I might be changing it out. Quickly, the tone in this workshop turned from it doesn't work to it's good enough. It's something we can live with. And this was a big fault on my part because I knew it was too early even to discuss the possibility of making a change. The previous system was only in for a year, and many weren't even using it that whole time. I knew that's where I wanted to go. I knew I wanted to change something, but I hadn't yet spent the time to get that buy-in to really go through the process and understand, how can we align something new to goals and objectives. Again, user buy-in will determine user adoption and ultimately the success of any change initiative. So now assuming that, we have everyone on board, we've communicated the need for a change and things like that, we can really kind of move into our selection process. And for this project, it was really only 2 steps for us, defining the requirements and qualifying the suppliers. When defining requirements, I like to split out my prereqs from everything else. These are the simple things, such as integration technology. How can I connect this system to my systems such as PLM or ERP, or is this a cloud solution, or do I want to host this on-premise? These are the easy things. Then, after that, you can really start to get into the functional requirements. This is where things tend to get more complex. Everyone has an opinion of what they need out of a system, and from a top-down approach, I can really define a few of the requirements, but regardless, no matter what, you'll have to prioritize. And let's face it, there really isn't a package out there that will satisfy every requirement 100% out of the box. For prioritization, I did have some help. I wanted to make sure that we had everyone input, everyone had an opportunity to weigh in on the requirements and ultimately the supplier selection. The solution for us was to use the AHP process. This tool allows users to weigh in on not only the requirements, but also the possible solutions to meet those requirements. So, okay, I just threw something new out there, or some, maybe some of you already know a little bit about AHP. So I'm going to take a really, really quick detour and just high-level explain what AHP is. AHP is a commonly accepted decision support technique. The key word for me there is support. It helps you draw conclusions. It does not make a choice for you. The software helps prioritize requirements and alternatives that have the highest probability of achieving a goal. In this case, it was prioritizing the functional requirements and measuring which suppliers can actually meet those requirements. I could talk all day about AHP, but that's not why we're here, so I would encourage anyone interested, to ask my good friend Google a little bit about AHP, and I believe DirectWorks will be following up with some resources on AHP for anyone who may be interested in checking that out. All right, so let's get back to the transformation. First thing I did was send out an AHP decision model to all end users. You can obviously do this without an AHP tool, but I had it at my disposal, so of course, why not use it? And I think you'll see in this slide and through the explanation of why we really did use it. In this step, I was still after user buy-in. I took all their feedback, taken through email or verbally, whatever it may be, and I put it into a model. And then I sent that model out to approximately 100 of our stakeholders. These questions and the way AHP does it forces users to prioritize what is important. For example, in AHP, I would ask, in respect to on-time sourcing, which is most important? The ability to track sourcing timing in a dashboard, or to automate a sourcing decision documentation? And by how much? So I'm forcing users to say one is more important to the other and to what extent. Next, we took that model, the results of that model, and my team went out and found suppliers that we assumed could meet those needs. This is just, going over what they post on their websites and their capabilities and things like that. We reviewed as many as 10 to 15 providers, and from there we developed a short list of suppliers that could in some way meet all or most of the functional requirements. And of course, we included the existing RFQ provider at that time. Next, we conducted live demonstrations of each system. For these demos, we provided that requirement criteria developed in the AHP model to each of the solution providers, and we asked them to demonstrate for our users how their solution may be able to fulfill each of those requirements. In these demonstrations, a majority of our stakeholders, which was about 100 users at that time, attended the demonstrations, and I made it a point to ensure that we had regional representation. And what I mean by that is we're currently stacked heavy in North America, so a majority of the users were from North America, but we made it a point to make sure we had representation from every region. Every region had to have a say. Cultures play a part in this as well. So finally, after all demonstrations concluded, I sent out one more model to the team. This time it was a little bit different. This time I was asking, based on the models and everything that everyone has seen, how well did each of those vendors weigh in on those functional requirements? So an example in this is in an AHP question, after the demos and after the users have seen how the supplier may be able to answer, each of those requirements, we start asking questions like, in regards to having an integrated cost breakdown, which supplier performed this task best? And again, by how much? So the little graph at the bottom, you can see, this is where AHP, again, just like with the requirements, forces our users to say supplier A versus supplier B, but to what extent? Obviously, there's a neutral middle line, and you can say they're equal, but for the most part, they're going to fall somewhere in between, to very little extent to a very great extent. Next, we reviewed those results of, the weighting of the functional requirements, as well as the results of the decision model of how well did each of the suppliers perform each of the functional requirements. The final 3 suppliers plus the existing supplier went through one final round of demonstrations, and the model was sent out one final time just to give people an opportunity to change their decisions. The results at that point now were used, just to strengthen user buy-in and to show that the change was necessary. The current supplier was one of the vendors going through the process, so I was able to not only demonstrate that the current tool was not sufficient, but more importantly, how the change better supports where this organization was going. By this time, the tone changed from resistant to change to being excited about the change, and ultimately, this is where we really want to be. By now, I personally was confident that everyone was ready for a change, and we're ready to move forward. Just so everyone knows, the selection process from start to finish, which is identifying those requirements, getting that feedback to the point of making a decision of which vendor to go for, took us about 6 months to do. But our case was maybe a little bit different than most. One, we were already on a provider. 2, that provider, we were locked into a contract with them. So we had definitely time to play with. Certainly you can extend that longer if you wanted to take more time and get more feedback, and you could certainly do it in less time. For us, we had the time to spare, so I took it. In the screenshot below, you'll see some numbers. If you go back one more slide, thank you. In the screenshot below, you see a couple of line items there. I blocked out all the supplier names, but you can see 100%, 72%, 66%, 41%. 41% was our existing tool. The power of having data behind supporting your project, shows right there. That 41% wasn't from me, it wasn't from top management. This was from the users weighing in on how well that tool provided what they wanted out of an RFQ tool. It was indisputable at this point. So now we've selected our supplier, we're ready to move forward. We're going to start talking more about, the global rollout and user adoption and how we achieved a higher level of user adoption even started from day one. Our global rollout included over 80 buyers globally. Quick note on that was that not all buyers would actually be using DirectWorks day one right out of the system, but all would be feeling the effect in downstream applications just in how the systems interact with each other. We planned for a 1-month overlap with the existing system to allow for anything in process to close. But the interesting thing here is that by this time, many buyers already made the decision to hold off, if time allowed, of course, on their RFQ activity until DirectWorks was live. And that, to me, was an indicator that, one, we did our homework up front, they were excited about the change, and that they were really ready to start using this new system. aside from the how and when we are going to roll out the system, it was key for me to make sure that the initial rollout included enhancements or efficiency gains to several of our key requirements that we found out from our AHP model. First, it had to be easy for the users to use. We just came out of a system that one of the major downfalls of it was they were saying it wasn't easy to use. So we immediately started off with a manual integration with our parts management database. This allowed a user to create content of an RFQ with just a few clicks of a button. So you can see in the screenshot below, this is actually our DirectWorks system. A buyer can take an Excel file that's provided out of our internal system, go into DirectWorks, click the import button, and in a few short seconds, they'll see all of the content that they needed to create an RFQ. This is, the part details, the plants receiving it, the volumes, the target costs, everything that goes into the content that a supplier needs to see in order to create a quote, all done within the click of a button, because the data exists. We don't want them to have to now enter this in twice. Second, I wanted to reduce the number of systems our buyers have to interact with on a daily basis. For RFQs, one of our challenges was that we would go through most of the process only to find out in the end that the supplier was troubled. It could have been a quality issue, could have been a compliance issue, but the fact is the buyer had to log into a different system just to find that out. Now, with DirectWorks, we're directly integrated with our quality and compliance system so that supplier information is up to date at all times. On day one, this was a manual process, but true to our commitment and DirectWorks' commitment to continuous improvement, we now have the two systems talking automatically, and the data syncs automatically overnight with no manual intervention. So the screenshot here below is a quick view of a supplier profile. This is all just parent or address type information, but if you were able to scroll down a little bit more if we were in the live system, I could get into financials. I could get into compliance. We track their quality certifications. I could get into their performance to our scorecard. Where are they at with quality? Where are they at with delivery? All right from within my RFQ tool and also right from within an RFQ itself. So now the buyer is informed and they are empowered. Next, everyone was looking for efficiency gains. Again, feedback from the old system was that it wasn't, there was really no benefit there. It lacked incentive to actually use it. It was just a task to do. Our system, prior to DirectWorks, only really handled RFQ. The output from it was unable to be used as is. Buyers at that time were forced to merge data from 3 different sources in order to create a sourcing approval document. Now, within DirectWorks, just like the other items, it's done with just a few short clicks. The screenshot below is a view of our sourcing approval form. This summary shows not just quote information such as piece price and logistics, but also supplier performance information, spend, compliance information, really anything in the DirectWorks supplier profile or the supplier information that we sync in from our other downstream applications, all presented to them now within the click of a button, very quickly right out of the DirectWorks system. Lastly, we wanted to gather more data, and more importantly, we wanted to put this information to use. Our old system did not allow us to capture anything other than the final price. The detailed cost breakdown was handled offline in multiple formats, which made it, 1, easy to just miss that detail or skip over intentionally if you really wanted to as a supplier. And 2, it made it impossible for us to compare suppliers side by side. We couldn't really compare apples to apples. In the automotive industry, we're typically comparing everything from setup, burden, and direct labor and manufacturing. It is very, very intrusive for those of you, who are in the manufacturing, and maybe it's the same across all organizations or all industries. But automotive is what I know, and I know that it is extremely intrusive in terms of the detail that we require from our suppliers and that our customers require from us. Now in DirectWorks, we're able to capture a full cost breakdown to be used in comparison with internal targets, as well as just comparison between quoting suppliers. Now, I will tell you that this also brings a challenge of its own. In some cases, suppliers are not willing or reluctant to provide that level of detail in the cost breakdown. And this just happens to be one of those cases where the suppliers actually prefer our old system because they were able to submit a quote without that supporting detail. In the old system, they could literally just submit the widget was $1, and we would be happy with that. Obviously, we weren't happy with it because we needed to go back and follow up with the supplier and collect that cost breakdown as a separate activity. But now with our DirectWorks template, it's integrated. It discourages that behavior because we're asking for it up front. However, we want it to be flexible, for those who may not be willing to provide the information. It could just be benchmarking activity, and we understand that. So they're still able to quote regardless. But now the buyer also has a tool to see side by side, not just the comparison, but also a very quick glance of who is actually supplying that information. We've communicated to our suppliers that if they want to be strategic and they want to continue to win new business, a full cost breakdown is absolutely required. As a buyer looking at this event, you can see in the screenshot there's 3 suppliers quoting. I cut the names out of it. But you can see setup, burden, and direct labor are all zeros, as well as raw material for the first 2 suppliers. That immediately tells me as a buyer that those 2 suppliers did not provide a cost breakdown. I'd also be willing to bet that those 2 suppliers are not strategic suppliers. And then we have the third one, which, side by side, you can see all of the comparisons. They're neutral from a pricing standpoint, and where they fall in with the comparisons with the red and green pricing. But at a glance, I can at least see that we, from this supplier, have a full cost breakdown, and they're meeting our requirements. And now I can compare apples to apples with anyone else who was, providing that entire cost breakdown. So those were just a few of the heavy-hitting items that we rolled out on day 1. I know I kind of went through that really quickly, and obviously we're going to have a Q&A session. I'd be more than happy to answer whatever I can. And I just wanted to end with this, really how far have we come? Well, we currently have an average of about 280 RFQs going out a month through the platform. We've integrated DirectWorks with our supplier quality system at a system level, so there's no manual intervention between there, so data quality is good. We're using the DirectWorks side-by-side comparison for buyers to track not just their suppliers side-by-side in terms of a breakdown, but we're also using it internally to track against cost models and cost targets. So now we can really and clearly communicate to a supplier what we expect to see for burden, for labor, for raw material, for a given commodity, and for even a region if you're talking, burden, labor costs, and things like that. So now we're giving the buyers more tools for negotiation at their fingertips, rather than digging in multiple systems around the world or multiple spreadsheets all over the place to try and get this level of detail. User adoption, internally, we're near 100%. There have been a few special cases where we opted to quote outside of the system, but we're certainly looking at ways to eliminate that. Honestly, from my perspective, we should never go around the system. There's only been a couple of cases where it was either a timing or a specific commodity where we wanted to go around it, but we're certainly looking into ways to make sure that everything is encapsulated, even right down to commodity-specific cost breakdowns that make more sense rather than an all-encompassing cost breakdown. And finally, we've seen significant increases to productivity. A quick story, to share on this real quick is that when we were going through this evaluation, obviously the attitude of everyone at that time was eRFQ is a pain, there's little incentive to actually use it. So I was asked, why does it seem that we were so much more efficient before when we didn't have such a rigid process and that there was no system in place? And to me that answer was simple. I said, ignorance is bliss. It only felt that way because we weren't doing the things we said we needed to do to achieve sourcing excellence. Yes, it's easier to require only a piece price, but when we have to justify tooling or we have to justify the cost to a customer, are we going to have the detail readily available to do so? And if we don't, what is that downstream effect? How do we get it? Yes, it's easier to take cost breakdowns in any format, but then what's the value in it? What's the value in collecting that information? We won't be able to compare it side by side. We won't be able to compare it apples to apples. We won't be able to compare it to cost models or cost targets. So again, absolutely, sometimes things are easier to do, but that always doesn't make them right. That's all I have for today. I know I went through it really fast. I want to thank you all for your time. Turn it back over to Wes for brief Q&A.